Hello friend, my name is Doombib and today we're going to be talking about No Thank You, which is a yaoi hentai visual novel that was created by Parade in 2013 and re-released in English in 2015, actually February specifically. It tells the story of Haru, a young man that gets hit by a car in an attempt to save a bystander, and that bystander, named Kouichi, takes him in as he has Plotimus Devicus Amnesia and he doesn't know who he is or where he lives, so Kouichi gives him a job at the bar he runs called Sotano. That bar actually ends up being a front as their primary duties actually include solving cases that the police won't. And of course, this is a hentai game, so he worms his way into bed with whatever hunk you decide tickles your fancy. But look! I put lights up and a little Santa hat for the holidays. Isn't that cute? Aren't I festive? So, let's be real here. I sat down and started playing the game, and I don't know what happened. Time just kind of like disappeared, and I got through all 4 playthroughs in one day. I didn't mean to, that was not my intention, but the story was just that outrageously good, and I honestly, for once, did not give a damn about the sex scenes. But you know, at first I was blushing and fangirling at all the yaoi goodness, but then there came a turning point in the story where I realized that this isn't just like a traditional BL title. There are 5 chapters and a couple of epilogues that sort of act as, you know, the bad/true ending depending on how you play the game. And within each chapter it has its own little mini story with whatever case the detective agency decides to take on in that little arc. Some story points when it comes to the cases will bleed together into different chapters, but for the most part, there's the base plot of the game, and then there's whatever story is going on in the route that you pick. Those are the ones that are consistent throughout the entire story. For the most part, the cases that you take on sort of just like are their standalone stories in that chapter. But that overall story is just fucking fantastic. No matter what route you take, you follow the general outline of the story. You come across a girl that's been abandoned by her mom, you help one of your co-workers' classmates find his lost brother, you help a Yakuza wife with the stalker. However, as the story progresses, maybe about like at the halfway point, it will just completely change, and like I said, each route is just completely different from the last. Not only that, but you're provided more insight to each of these cases, and as you get more information, it will radically change your perception of the situation depending on which hunk you decide to snuggle up with. Also, after your first playthrough, you're given more of a look of what's going on within Haru's mindset, and you get to see what's happening between scene transitions. The more story routes you complete, the more bonus scenes you unlock, so there's a metric shit ton of replay value. This is a dark story that touches on heavy topics, so just a heads up to anyone who saw the comedy tag on Manga Gamer's website and thought this was going to be a comedy. It's not. This is not some happy-go-lucky fun shit. Maybe I get a little too enveloped in these stories because that tends to happen when pretty much your entire life is centered around fictional stories by this point, but there kind of came a few points when I was playing this game and I just kind of had to turn the game off and walk away and go watch cartoons and eat ice cream because this game got me really depressed. Like, Katawa Shoujo, which I reviewed here, didn't even come close. When it comes to the characters, let it be said that at first I did actually think that this was just a cast of cliches and I wasn't too interested, so I just kind of want you to keep that in mind if you do decide to play it. Like, just don't let it put you off, just sit down and sit tight because it gets way better. Because really, each of these characters have a complex background that go way beyond what you just see on the surface. It was almost ironic, really, because, you know, the base plot is that, you know, these are handsome men working at a bar, but really, like, it's not just a bar, there's actually, like, an underground detective agency going on. It was almost like the cliches that we saw were the facades they put up for the customers, and then their complex backgrounds and, you know, just their personalities and their stories were sort of like the underground agents. You know what I'm trying to say. So, if we're totally honest, I didn't really like Haru. I mean, he was that hypersexual type that just kind of like forced his wants onto people that really didn't seem all that into it, and it was just kind of hard to connect to him. If anything, he almost felt like a plot device so the creators could find reasons to throw smut into the story. Which is a huge shame because if you strip away the hypersexualness, he was actually like a good character, and there was potential for him to be a really deep character. Also, why was he always on top? I mean, in literally every sex scene, he was topping, and are you really telling me that in a room full of 5, big, muscular, headstrong dudes, that Haru is the only one that doesn't take it in the butt? In a sense, that did kind of kill some of the whole fappability thing. Shout out to some guy who really wanted that to come back for me, because it was like, the scenes were creative, but they weren't creative. In terms of the scripting and writing out Haru's thoughts, yeah, I think they did a pretty good job at that. They did good at keeping things colorful and interesting, even if at times it kind of felt like this game wasn't really a yaoi game and it was really more of like an expertly veiled anatomy course. However, each route took the same exact path when it came to like spacing out the sex scenes, with very little variations. It doesn't really help that 3 out of the 4 men you're jumping under the sheets with just look really uncomfortable, and then the game just kind of wrote it off as just, yeah, he's just embarrassed. They also seem to add like 2 or 3 too many sex scenes in each route, because by the end of the story, you're being thrown through this vicious cycle of feels while simultaneously clicking through a bunch of different, fuckboy scenes. For lack of a better word, that's really all these were. It reminded me of that Family Guy episode where Brian dies and then Peter is talking about like going off for a sad wank. Like, I was just really sad during some of these scenes, and I couldn't really enjoy them for what they were. I mean, some of them were scripted to be sad, but for the most part, the others were just kind of timed poorly. So if you just, ignore the scenes that make this into a hentai game and you actually just focus on the story, it's really, really effing good. Because there are little pet kittens involved. And I mean, really, when a story involves good food, alcohol, handsome dudes, and pet cats, what more do you want? Parade did a fantastic job at putting a crap ton of work into creating this visual novel, which is not something a lot of developers can say about themselves, if we're totally honest. This game is relatively long, so while it seems like you're not given that many options, if you actually start tallying them up, you'll realize that there are actually a lot of choices you can make in the game, and almost every choice you make will directly influence which of the 12 endings you'll get. So don't let the game's length fool you into thinking that this is just one of those visual novels that you just kind of sit through. That being said, I do kind of have a bone to pick with the no thank you option. You see, there are some points in the game where you will be given the option to click the no thank you button that appears in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. And while the wording initially makes you think that it's a button to reject whatever thought process is going through Haru's head, that isn't always the case. In fact, when it's first introduced as a mechanic, it's when you're about to save Kouichi from being hit by a car, and I was thinking that if I clicked no thank you, it would stop Haru from throwing himself in front of the car. But that wasn't the case. So that was kind of confusing, and I kind of got like a little anxious whenever the option came up, because I didn't know what Haru was going to do if I pressed it. Aside from that, let's give Parade a huge round of applause for making this game as customizable as humanly possible. You can toggle each character's voices depending on how loud you want them to be, including when they're just talking in the background, when they're talking up front, when they're going down on you, etc. You can also make visual customizations regarding body hair, with some characters having multiple options available. You can also use sliders to determine how fast auto runs, how opaque the text box is. The list goes on. Instead of just doing the bare minimum, which usually includes just like text speed and, music volume, Parade went to the moon and back in ensuring that this is an experience that will be completely tailored to whatever the player wants. That is something that I feel is a quality that is pretty damn rare when it comes to visual novel creators, so I absolutely I feel like they deserve recognition for that. So let's start off with, of course, the character sprites, since those are the main focuses of the game. So these aren't the most intricately detailed character sprites at first glance, and they may come off as sort of plain, especially in comparison to the backgrounds. But the more you look at them, the more detail you're able to see. Whether it be the slight downward flick of Haru's eyelashes when he smiles, the subtle folds in the clothing that cast little shadows over a small part of the fabric, the small bits of texture added in a reused hairline, or even just a slight changes in expression, there was clearly a ton of work put into each character sprite. And while they don't vary a whole lot in terms of poses, the creators definitely made up for that by giving them multiple hairstyles, outfits, and expressions. It isn't just the main characters that have sprites either. Even seemingly meaningless characters that only show up for a few scenes are given well-created sprites that have almost as much variety. Now, I know the vote is still out for a lot of people because the community seems to be torn in half on whether or not this should be considered a BL or a Bara title, but personally, I don't give a damn. So, the only complaint I really have when it comes to the character designs is their noses, because there were a few times where their noses just looked wrong. Sprites aside, let's talk about the world design, because if there's anything I tend to tear a game apart over, it's the backgrounds. Thankfully, No Thank You is full of magnificent backgrounds. Whether it be the dimly lit bar that our loving cast works at, the variety of apartments we come across, the streets Haru travels on, or even the various locations that he goes to with his chosen love interest, every scene was clearly created with an expert hand that knows exactly what they're doing. There's detail everywhere you look, there's texture in every item's design, the coloring and shading is impeccable, and it's all done without ever coming off as distracting or looking out of place. However, let it not go unsaid that the game being fixed at a 1280 by 720 window did not irritate me a little. Because, I mean, when I'm playing games, I do tend to play in windowed mode, that way I can talk to you guys in the official Skype group, and so it's easier for me to take down notes. However, as a reviewer, nothing gets under my skin more than the quality downscale that comes from having to stretch open the window to fit the screen when I am editing these together. As for the what are these called? Like the CG, the stills, we'll call them CG, and if I'm wrong, then you guys can correct me later. Okay, so obviously, the stills look hella fly. The shading is perfect, there's detail up the wazoo, and for all intents and purposes, they are visually stellar in every way. What I wanted to touch base on specifically, however, was how there's a very apparent upgrade in quality from, you know, normal gameplay to the still CGIs, but the change isn't jarring or distracting. And that's a problem I see within a lot of visual novels where the CG is gorgeous and the rest of the game is lacking, or vice versa. There is a very even balance between the CGs and the normal gameplay that doesn't come off as awkward or really distracting at all. That being said, I do wish there were more stills for scenes outside of just, you know, Haru being a little fuckboy, because that seemed to be where a lot of the attention was put. So all in all, I found No Thank You to be an exceptional hentai visual novel. The story was stellar, there was a ton of work put into the gameplay options, this was visually impeccable, and just for all intents and purposes, it really did blow my expectations out of the water. It's also fully voice acted, which was a huge plus, though I do suggest turning the volume down during some of the sex scenes, because if we're totally honest, some of the characters kind of sound like they're being strangled, and that got a little uncomfortable. Do I regret purchasing this? Yes. If only because it made me super depressed, it ripped my heart out, lit it on fire, and then threw it into a fucking wood chipper. Chipper. But that's mostly because I'm a crybaby that gets really depressed whenever Lisa C releases a new novel, and I've kind of got like yaoi PTSD over this. But would I purchase it again? Absolutely. It's about $40 on Manga Gamer, and I know that is really effing expensive for a visual novel, especially if it's just a download. But for the quality we're given, for the amount of replay value this game gives us, because I think it took me like 30 hours to get through all of the game, I really do feel like it was worth the cost. Especially when I do actually want to go back and play the game some more, because I am just a masochistic little fuck and I really just enjoyed the game. If you want to check it out though, I do have an affiliate link in the description below. No, this is not sponsored, they did not ask me to make a review for this. However, the affiliate link does help me get more hentai games so I can review for you guys, and it makes me look cool. Anyways, those are my thoughts on No Thank You. If you have played it to completion, which case was your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, you can find all of my social media as well as my Patreon in the description. Happy unbirthday, and I will see you later. Bye!